RFK Racing is going to appeal the penalties that they received last week, and it looks like COTA is going to be returning to the NASCAR schedule in 2023. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We've got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to start off paint schemes and sponsorship news first. Let's jump into those really quickly. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Bubba Wallace's 2022 Dr. Pepper scheme that we're going to see this weekend in Richmond and multiple other races throughout the season. I really love this paint scheme. They do a really good job using sponsorship utilization on the car, and the paint scheme looks really nice. Kind of gives me those old BK Racing vibes, which I was a really big fan of, and I'm definitely looking forward to see on the racetrack this weekend here at Richmond and other races throughout the season. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Howie DeSavino's 2022 Alpha Prime scheme that we're going to see this weekend in his debut at Richmond Raceway. I think this paint scheme is really cool in my opinion. Alpha Prime's had a lot of really good paint schemes. This one's no exception. Overall, I think it's a nice looking paint scheme. I think they did a great job on it, and I'm looking forward to see it on the racetrack this weekend here at Richmond Raceway. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ricky Stenhouse Jr.'s 2022 The Frozen Farmer scheme that we're going to see throughout the 2022 season. This paint scheme actually looks really good in my opinion. They did a great job using sponsorshipization. It's a very wacky looking scheme, but I'm looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend and multiple other races throughout the 2022 season. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Roger Cruz's 2022 Virginia State University scheme that we're going to see this weekend at Richmond, his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut. This paint scheme looks really sick in my opinion. It's really awesome to see that also the university is once again going to be sponsoring another driver in the series. Really cool to see that, and I'm looking forward to see his paint scheme out on the racetrack. Good luck to Roger Cruz this weekend. Good to see that he's going to be making his debut this weekend here at Richmond. Next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Kyle Seek's 2022 Engineer Group scheme that we're going to see this weekend in the Xfinity Series race at Richmond. Really love this paint scheme. They did a really good job on it. It's cool to see that a new company is coming in to sponsor Kyle Seek this weekend. They've had a lot of cool companies that have come to work with them. Overall, really awesome, and I'm looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend here at Richmond. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is John Hunter Nemechek's 2020 Safeway scheme that we're going to see this weekend here at Richmond. I love this paint scheme. I've been a big fan of the Safeway schemes in the past. This one is no exception. They've done a really good job on these paint schemes in the past, and I'm looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend here at Richmond. I think it's a really nice looking scheme. And I believe the final paint scheme we are taking a look at is Brandon Jones' 2022 Nipco Menard scheme that we're going to see this weekend here in the Xfinity Series race at Richmond. This paint scheme is met, in my opinion. I do like the Menards in the background. It's cool the Menards continue to sponsor Brandon Jones. But the front of the car does not look the best, in my opinion. But again, it's cool to see that a new company is working with them. Overall, we hopefully see a good rep in the team this weekend. Hopefully, Brandon Jones can bounce back. As we're getting into some confrontation we're going to talk about later in this episode, good to see that for sure. Hopefully, this car will have a good run this weekend here at Richmond. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Cookout. As Cookout has renewed its title sponsorship of the Southern 500 for multiple seasons. It's unclear how many years they've extended, but they have a multi-year extension with the Southern 500. Cookout has sponsored the last couple Southern 500s, and Cookout, of course, a company that's been around for a very long time in the area about down there. Really cool to see the Cookout is going to be continuing to work with NASCAR and continue to work with Southern 500, and really awesome to see that for sure. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about first-time winners. There was a fact that was brought up by Peter Strada earlier yesterday, and he says that 2022 is the first season where we've had 3 first-time winners in the first 6 races since 2001. Now, I believe in the last 21 or 22 years, the most first-time winners in a season was 5. I think 2002 had that. I think 2001 had it. Also, 2011 had that, I believe, as well. So far this year, we've had 3 first-time winners. Of course, that's Austin Cindric, Ross Chastain, and Chase Briscoe. In 2001, you had Kevin Harvick, you had Michael Waltrip, and you had, I believe, Elliott Sadler, who all picked up their first career victories. I think that's such an interesting fact that it just shows, one, that the youth is really coming into play, and they're coming out there and winning races. Overall, I think that's an interesting fact, and really cool to see that for sure. Really exciting. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the youth movement. Cup drivers have won the last 12 straight full points paying Cup Series race. Now, you technically may not be able to include this, but some people are going to probably include Joey Logano's unpoints paying win, but that was a non-points paying win. The last 12 Cup Series races have been won by drivers under the age of 30 and are drivers under the age of 31 years old. This just shows that there is a true youth movement happening in NASCAR currently at the moment. And you look at the success of the youth movement currently, I think it's really, really awesome to see that for sure. And again, really cool to see that we've got that happening for the sport. When you have a youth movement happening in NASCAR, you want to see it succeed. I think it's really, really awesome to see for sure. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about F1 and Funko Pops. As Adam Stern reported this on Friday afternoon, that Funko has struck a figurine licensing deal with Mercedes F1 team, with the first batch including ex-Mercedes driver Valtteri Bottas alongside Lewis Hamilton. Now, they probably should have done this last year because Mercedes absolutely struggled this year compared to where they were last year. But I think what's really, really cool is the fact that F1 is partnering up with Funko Pops. Now, I believe NASCAR has had Funko Pops in the past as well. But I think what's really, really sick to see is the fact that you've got Funko working with a team and working with F1. It just shows that F1's brand is growing. I think them working with Funko is really, really awesome. And I'm glad to see this story is popping up for sure. And now we're going on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about William Byron. As William Byron is going to run a couple marquee late model races at Berlin Raceway later this year. He is going to race in the Money in the Bank 150 on June 8th, and then later this year, he is going to be racing at the Battle Berlin 250 on August 10th. William Byron, of course, known being for a three-time NASCAR Cup Series winner and 2017 NASCAR Xfinity Series champion. He seems to be doing more of races outside the box and going racing in different types of venues. We know how good he is in the late model. It seems like anytime he wins a late model race, he goes out the next week and wins the NASCAR Cup Series race. So really cool to see that for sure. I think he'll be a major, major contender in those events. I hope he does really, really good. And like I said, it's really, really awesome to see that he is going to be doing some late model events. I think, again, very, very cool and very exciting to see that he'll be doing some of those here in the near future. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about 2311 Racing. As 2311 Racing is already following through on its goal to try to diversify NASCAR, hiring a host of a new staff from outside the industry, including many who are Black and Latino, among other underrepresented groups. I think it's really cool that 2311 is being a team that is trying to be more diversified when it comes to different cultures and backgrounds. We've been seeing more with other teams as well, but I think what's really, really cool to see is the fact that 2311 is continuing to be more a team that's trying to be more diversified and bringing more people into the team. You look at the team as well, a team that's been absolutely improving, though they need to figure out how to be able to put lug nuts on a car. Hopefully some of these guys can figure out, especially since Booty Barker most likely is going to get suspended for 4 races due to lug nut penalties. We're probably going to need to see those guys perform. So really it is so cool to see that 2311 is continuing to diversify. Just please figure out how to put lug nuts on the car and not have lug nut issues where your tire is coming off. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Aric Almirola. As Aric Almirola currently right now is the only driver to finish on the lap in every race this season. I think that's a very interesting stat, and what's really good to see about that is the fact Aric Almirola is finishing these races. Compared to last year, Aric Almirola absolutely struggled. This year, Aric Almirola definitely seems to be a lot better of a driver and much more consistent driver. And you're going to need to be that, but you're going to need to be that. That being said, though, Aric Almirola needs to be a little more contending up front, but I do think it's good to see that he continues to finish these races, because, again, you've got to finish these races and finish up front. So, really great to see that for sure, and cool to see that Aric Almirola is right now the only driver to finish on the lead lap in every single race. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Denny Hamlin. This is a very interesting stat about Denny Hamlin. Denny Hamlin, for the first time in his full-time NASCAR Cup Series career, he has not finished in the top 10 in the first 6 races. I had to do that research, and I found it crazy that this is the first season in Denny Hamlin's career where he has not finished in the top 10 in the first 6 races. It shows a lot of things. One, Denny Hamlin is having a really, really bad year, and you expect Denny Hamlin to perform a lot better than he generally has. But Denny Hamlin has absolutely struggled. Now, I do think that Denny Hamlin, by the time we get to the end of the year, I think that he will absolutely be a contender by the end of the season. But it just shows that Denny Hamlin right now is absolutely struggling, and he's got a lot of work to do if he's going to want to be a contender. But like I said, I think that Denny Hamlin will be much more better contending as we get farther down the road, to be honest with you. And now we're going to move on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Biffle. As Biffle, of course, who's one of the team owners and co-owners of Trackhouse Racing, he sent out a celebratory congratulatory treat to Ross Chastain, basically saying it's the first of many, and I want to send my congratulations to Ross Chastain. Biffle, of course, like I said, who's the co-owner of Trackhouse Racing, basically sending that tweet. Really, it's really interesting is Biffle has been to every race this year except this past weekend at COTA. So he was not able to make it out to the circuit of the America race. But he's not the only one who's been congratulating Ross Chastain. I've seen Chip Ganassi congratulate him. I've seen other team owners congratulate him, including Nice Motorsports. And also Jimmy Johnson has been able to congratulate him as well. And even Alex Bowman has been congratulating him as well. We'll get into all that Alex Bowman situation last on debacle in just a little bit. But I think it's cool to see the team owner who unfortunately wasn't able to make it to the race. I think it's cool to see, though, that Biffle was able to get a very celebratory congratulations out to him. I think that's really, really sick. Really, really awesome. I think it's really cool to see that he was able to send that out to him. I think it's very, very fun, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the Dash for Cash drivers who are eligible for Dash for Cash this weekend. So the 4 drivers who are going to be eligible for the Dash for Cash this weekend at Richmond are AJ Allmendinger, Austin Hill, Noah Grayson, and Sam Mayer, who have qualified for the Dash for Cash. Of course, Dash for Cash, I believe, is a thing that happens for 4 races. No Cup Series drivers eligible to run. It's why you're not seeing any Cup guys getting into the event and running this weekend. Of the 4 guys who I think most likely is going to win, I most likely am going to say AJ is going to win because he's been really fast at Richmond in the past. They've all seen College show some pace there, so I think AJ is the most likely to win, but also Sam Mayer probably could be a threat to win as well because he was really fast in that 99 Beach Club Motorsports car last year. So really cool to see that for sure, and glad to see that AJ and all those guys are going to be attending. I think AJ is going to win it, but we'll have to wait and see what happens and see if AJ will win it. We'll see what happens down the road. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Knoxville Raceway. As was announced yesterday from Knoxville Raceway account, that the Marion County Fair Association has approved an overall $1 million upgrade in lighting to Knoxville. Musco will be teasing new LED lights during May and June. They've had the same lighting system up until now. They've had the same lighting system since 1997. So, of course, it's going to need an overall upgrade to make sure the track can be kept up to speed. And they're trying to basically for the new fans as well, especially for the new guy, especially for the Cup guy or when the guys from trucks come over. They want to have a new LED lighting system. I think this is really, really cool to see that they're updating lighting. Again, the lighting they've had really for almost 25 years, almost nearly 30 years now. So I think it's important to update your lighting, and overall, it's good to see that they're updating the lights at the track. It's been needed to happen for a very, very long time. So I think that's really, really exciting and really, really awesome, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Dylan Bassett. As Dylan Bassett is going to drive the 77 for Bassett Racing this weekend at Richmond Raceway. Bassett Racing has attempted to make the last 2 races in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. They've attempted 2 races this year, but unfortunately they have failed to qualify in both those races. But we've looked at I've actually looked back at some of the Bassett Racing stats, and they've been able to actually be really, really fast in DJM Racing equipment, which we'll get in DJM Racing later in this episode. I think Dylan Bassett's got a good shot to make it into the field. He's going to have to qualify his way in, so hopefully Dylan Bassett can be able to qualify his way in to the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at Richmond, because if he can, I think he could honestly be a very shocking underdog to have a good run this weekend at Richmond. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Matt Mills. As Matt Mills is going to drive the 55 for Buescher Motorsports this weekend at Richmond. Buescher Motorsports is going to have 4 cars this weekend. We'll get into another driver that'll be racing in here in just a few minutes. But this will be Matt Mills' next start here. Now, this will be a really big prepared Buescher Motorsports car. Matt Mills had some good runs, but also some not-so-great runs in Xfinity Series this year. So I'm not sure how well he's going to perform this weekend. I've not really seen how good he is when it comes historically when he go back to Richmond. So I hope that Matt Mills can do really, really good here, and I want to see him have a good run. I think it's important if he can have a good run this weekend at Richmond. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Garrett Smithley. As Garrett Smithley is going to drive the 15 for RFK Racing this weekend at Richmond. I believe this will be Garrett Smithley's 4th start of the 2022 season. He ran all the West Coast races. And of course, he's supposed to run quite a few races in that 15 car this year. Garrett Smithley has not been really that impressive so far this year, so I'm really not expecting much from the RFK Racing group in that 15 team. I think if he comes out of this race with a top 30, I think that's going to be a really, really strong run for the team. But I'm not really expecting much from the 15 team this weekend. So it's good to see that he's back. I want to see him do well, but honestly, I'm not expecting much. So hopefully he can do good, well, and prove me wrong. but honestly, my expectations are really not through the roof for him. So I do hope he proves me wrong, but honestly, I've not been entirely that impressive. So I hope he proves me wrong, but again, I'm not expecting much from him this weekend, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Bubba Wallace. Now, Bubba Wallace is speaking to the media before the COTA race happened this weekend on Saturday, and he says that there was concern about his shoulder after the Atlanta race. He said it was sore basically up to Wednesday, but he was ready to go and racing. Now, for those who did watch the NASCAR Cup Series race at Atlanta Motor Speedway, on the last lap of the race, he was involved in a very, very crazy accident coming to the checker flag, where he got a ton of damage. And you have to remember that he had shoulder surgery over the offseason, so that's one of the biggest reasons why there is definitely concern around Bubba Wallace. It is good, though, to see that Bubba Wallace is basically okay and was able to race, considering the fact that Bubba Wallace, of course, is looking to have some good runs. He hasn't had the best start to the year, to say the least, especially after the tire problems he had at the beginning of the year. It's one thing that hopefully the team will be looking to improve on, is those issues and kicking out some of those issues that they've had. That being said, though, it's good to see that Bubba Wallace is okay after the shoulder surgery, and that happened right there. Good to see that for sure, and I'm overall glad to see that he is okay. You don't want to see anybody get seriously hurt, and I'm glad to see that Bubba Wallace is okay, especially after what happened in the race. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Santino Ferrucci. And Santino Ferrucci was at the COTA race this past weekend, but as basically a spectator, as someone inside the garage. And he said he had no plans to race during the weekend. And he does say that he has any race in NASCAR's R2 being out. So it looks like Santino Ferrucci is going to be racing some point in NASCAR this season. It really is unclear what team he's racing for, but if you look at the shirt that he was wearing, it looks like if he's going to run this year, it's most likely going to be with the Sam Hunt Racing Group on a part-time basis. Now, Santino Ferrucci, of course, made his IndyCar season debut in the Texas race because he, of course, was substituting for Jack Harvey and ran extremely well in that race, and I believe got a top 10 in that race, and if I'm not mistaken, so he had a really strong run there. And, of course, he ran in NASCAR Xfinity Series last year and had some pretty decent performances with Sam Hunt Racing. It's unclear how many races he's going to run, but I do think it's really, really awesome and really, really cool to see that Santino Ferrucci is potentially going to get back behind the wheel. I think it's important for a guy like him to get behind the wheel, and I do hope that he gets that opportunity to get behind the wheel here in the near future, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Brandon Jones versus Josh Biffle. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, you probably did not see this because Fox did not cover this. But on the last lap of the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, Brandon Jones on the front stretch basically turned Josh Biffle. And Brandon Jones admitted on the radio and basically says that he straight up wrecked him. Well, Josh Biffle was not very happy, and he took to Twitter later that evening, and he says that IBS said to if I was running lap times outside of the top 20 in a Joe Gibbs racing car. Doesn't justify what the 19 did to us, so wrecked us on the freaking straightaway. And then basically later reiterating and said basically daddy's money. Josh Biffle was going off on Twitter, and I really honestly cannot blame Josh Biffle for being upset. Brandon Jones should be performing way better than that. Bubba Wallace had a lot more speed in the race. I know his finish did not reflect on that due to transmission problems, but literally he was running better. Ty Gibbs on damaged car was still running better than Brandon Jones, and there's no excuse for that. Brandon Jones should be performing better. You're in a Joe Gibbs racing car. You essentially should be running up front. You should not be getting outbeat or almost getting beat by guys from Alpha Prime Racing. And it just shows how much better Alpha Prime Racing has gotten. That being said, though, Brandon Jones absolutely clearly at fault for the wreck. You cannot legitimately turn somebody on the straightaway and expect that someone's going to repay you, especially since we're going to Richmond. It wouldn't shock. I think Biffle is running Richmond too, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't remember if he is or not, but I think he's running Richmond, if I'm not mistaken, or later this year. So he might have to pay him back at some point this year, and honestly, I'd be in favor of him doing it because Brandon Jones has a lot of people who do not like him, and he really kind of deserves to get paid back for what happened. So we'll wait to see what happens in regards to that, but overall, crazy story for sure, and we'll see what happens down the road. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about Mike Joy. Now, Mike Joy was at the tweet-up that happens with Jeff Gluck and Bob Pockers, basically at that tweet-up, and he basically tells stories about in the booth this year so far. Talked about and clarifies what Matt said to Joey Logano. Basically said he called him friend. I heard that as well. Joey Logano also clarified that as well on the radio. Basically said friend. He didn't say what a lot of people thought he said on there. And then he also talked about how Danica did not want to talk to Ricky Stenhouse Jr. And then Mike Joy continued on talking about it and basically said, Clint Boyer basically said, the producer said, hey, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. finished 18th in stage. Do you think we should talk to him? They were really picking on Danica, and I find it really, really funny the fact they were trying to get under Danica's nerves just a little bit, considering we know that Danica and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. used to date each other, but they broke up a couple of years ago, and it seems like that relationship did not go very, very well, because it seems like Danica overall did not want to talk to Ricky Stenhouse Jr. at the end of the day. Mike Joy is a really, really funny guy, and I think it's going to suck to see him go and get out of this sport. Again, Mike Joy's done a lot of great things for the sport over the years. He's one of the greatest commentators of all time. I still think Ken Squire is the best, but I think Mike Joy's up there as one of the greatest commentators of all time. And I think it's going to be really, really sad when he unfortunately leaves the sport. So, very sad day when he leaves, but Mike Joy bringing up some really awesome and great stories overall. So, really cool to see that for sure, and great story for sure. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch versus Alex Bowman versus Stewart Friesen. If you watch the NASCAR Camp World Truck Series race, you probably know what I'm talking about. So, in turn 11 on the last lap of the race, Kyle Busch has a couple tenth advantage. On the last lap going into turn number 11, there is some contact between the three of them going into the corner. Alex Bowman and Stewart Friesen basically get into Kyle Busch, and they basically cause a pile-up into each other where they're side by side, and Zane Smith creeps by and steals the victory and goes on to win the race. After the race, Alex Bowman went to talk to Kyle Busch, and Alex Bowman said that Kyle Busch was very, very miffed. Then Kyle Busch went on to basically blame both of the drivers, Bowman and Friesen, and they basically said missed the corner and overdrove it. Kyle Busch is definitely really, really respectful in the interview, but Kyle Busch also said when he talked to him, basically said he wasn't happy with Alex Bowman right there. I can't really blame Kyle Busch for being upset. Kyle Busch had this race really won in the bag, and all those restarts kind of unfortunately cost Kyle. I know a lot of people don't like it when leeches race in this series. You can definitely call Kyle Busch a leech, but at the same time, Kyle Busch did have the best truck most of the day. It's just that Alex Bowman and Stewart Friesen really were sending it at the corner and took each other out. Stewart Friesen also was not happy with Alex Bowman as well, by the way. I really don't understand why Stewart Friesen wasn't happy with him. He was another driver that really made a mistake at the end of the day. Kyle Busch was an innocent bystander in the situation. You cannot blame Kyle Busch for being upset right there. So, overall, we'll see if there's some tempers between these drivers, especially if they race against each other long-term down the road. We'll wait to see what happens, but overall, we're waiting for that story for sure, and we'll see what happens down the road, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Jessica Friesen. As Jessica Friesen is going to drive the 62 for Hallmark Friesen Racing for 2 races this year at Bristol Dirt in Knoxville. Jessica Friesen, of course, is the wife of Stewart Friesen, and she actually made her Truck Series debut at the Knoxville Truck Series race last year, albeit her performance is not really that great, although I will say the Truck Series race in Knoxville was an absolute mess. It was a very, very big shit show, and a lot of chaos happened in that event. Jessica Friesen, of course, has won multiple dirt races back in basically up in New York, if I'm not mistaken. She's also a champion up in New York and Canada as well. So it's cool to see she's getting another opportunity to race. I think that she'll do pretty well. That truck didn't have some good performances. It was running pretty well with Todd Bodine. But again, let's be for real with Todd Bodine. He didn't finish the race off really, really good. But again, of course, Todd Bodine hasn't been in a truck in many, many years. So no surprise, he absolutely struggled. I think she'll be able to qualify the truck in the race because, again, they've only had one race, but they didn't have a great points finish. So, of course, the truck's going to run quite a few races here. Try to get good owner's points as well. So, really cool to see for sure that she's entering the event. I hope that she can do really, really good in the 62 truck for Hallmark Friesen. I think she can survive. I think she could get some top 20s in the truck series, but we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to your performances at those respective tracks. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Preece. As Ryan Preece is going to drive the 5 for BJ Club Motorsports this weekend at Richmond. This will be the first of 3 starts that Ryan Preece is going to have in the 5 car. Now, one really important thing to note about this 5 car is while this is technically going to be a Biffle Club Motorsports car, this also is going to be a Stewart Racing prepared car. So I expect that this car is going to be very, very competitive overall for the victory. And I think Ryan Preece has a very good chance to win this weekend in that 5 cars. I think Ryan Preece is a very talented and very capable driver. He most likely will be jumping up in the Cup Series next year on a full-time basis. And, of course, he's a third driver for Stewart Racing. Again, he'll be making 3 starts here, and this is the first of 3. I think Ryan Preece will be very, very competitive in this 5 car. It is very cool to see that Ryan Preece is getting back behind the wheel in a 5 car for DJM Racing. I wish the best of luck to him, and hopefully we will see Ryan Preece do well in that 5 car. I think he'll be a contender for the victory. I know that sounds crazy for BH Club Motorsports, but I do think that Ryan Preece is going to do really good in that 5 car for DJM Racing, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Greg Biffle. As Greg Biffle is going to drive the 44 for NY Racing once again at Richmond. This will be, I believe, the fourth race for the 2014 this season. They've attempted at the Daytona 500, then they attempted at Vegas, and then they, of course, attempted at Atlanta Motor Speedway, where they got their first top 20 with Greg Biffle. Like I said, this will be the fourth start for the team. Most thing I'm intrigued to see is what the paint scheme is going to look like, because they've had some really nice-looking paint schemes over the last couple years. But one thing I will say, it's good to see that NY Racing is continuing to show up most of these weeks. They did say they're going to try to run a majority of the season. I do think that NY Racing is overall a is a team that's got RCR backing, so you think the team will try to form as well as they can. But I think it's cool to see the NY Racing showing up. I don't expect them to have a top 20 or top 25 run. I think the goal for them is try to get a top 30 and try to get as many owners points as possible. But I think we're going to see NY Racing enter quite a few races this year. Again, if they keep running the race and get points, they won't have to worry about qualifying race for these races and stuff. They'll be good in owners points over the season. So overall, really exciting to see for sure that NY Racing is continuing to show up each week, and hopefully Greg Biffle can do well. I think a top 30 would be really good for the organization, and I do hope that NY Racing can have a good run this weekend at Richmond Racing. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about DJM Racing. As it was announced last night, that DJM Racing is going to downsize from 3 to 2 full-time cars in the 2022 season, and the third car, the 92 car, will be a part-time entry. All the drivers they currently have at the moment, that being Alex Abay, Kyle Weatherman, Mason Massimo, and other drivers, will be in that car. And also the 92 DJM Racing points are going to be going over to the 0, have been transferred over to the 08 for SS Greenlight Racing to make sure they make every single race. They will now have 24 points in owners points. That's definitely really unfortunate, considering that 92 car has had some really impressive runs. Whether it's Kyle Weatherman, it's been Kyle Weatherman to run car, or when Ross Chastain was in the car, that car has been really impressive. And it's definitely really unfortunate to see that DJM Racing is not going to be running any more races this year. Well, not many races with the third car. They did say overall that plans can absolutely change for the 92 car, but I do think, like I said, it's very unfortunate to see that DJM Racing is not going to continue running that car on a full-time basis. But if they're going to be trying to put more resources into their second car, I don't really blame them, because again, I think the most important thing is trying to get those other two cars, the 36 and the 91 car, trying to get those cars up their performance and up the speed. So it definitely overall is unfortunate, but I do respect their decision. Again, it definitely, like I said, it is really unfortunate they're not going to be running that car more races than they have. But at the same time, I think that if they're going to try to, like I said, put more performance into those two cars, I think that's the most important thing. So I do hope that they can get the cars forming as good as they can, and hopefully we will see them do really good in those races coming up. Hopefully that we'll see more performance upgrades here later down the road. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, if you did watch the NASCAR Cup Series race at Circuit of the Americas, you're probably wondering what happened to Kyle Busch on the last lap, because he's running 6th or 7th at the time, and a lot of people thought that Chase Elliott or Tyler Reddick had gotten into the back of Kyle Busch on the last lap. That's actually not the case. We actually got the replay from Kenza Fan 17, Nathan Kiami. I don't remember the guy's name exactly, but I'm going to give a shout out to Nathan for this. We're basically having a replay of the wreck. Basically, on the last lap, I believe, going into the SS, Kyle Busch got very loose and spun out on his own. The second time, however, when he spun out and why he finished in the back is because Harrison Burton, who was running basically outside the top 20 at the time, I believe, he got into the back of Kyle Busch and basically spun him out. And that's why Kyle Busch ended up finishing nearly outside the top 30 and not there. It took nearly a day, though, for us to find out what truly happened to Kyle Busch. And honestly, I think that's a little bit ridiculous. And it's something that is not just a thing on Fox, by the way. NBC's had problems, too, where they've not been able to catch this. The fact that someone on Twitter or someone on YouTube is able to find that replay and not someone like you, someone like you and me can find it, and not Fox talking about it until nearly a day later is something really frustrating, especially for Kyle Busch fans. And we're also still trying to figure out what the heck happened to Kyle Larson. I've heard maybe it was Joey Hand or Corey LaJoie who got into the back of it, but still, the fact that they legitimately took so long to figure out what happened to Kyle Busch at the end of the race is really frustrating. It is good, though, if we're able to figure that out, but at the same time, it should not take nearly a day to figure out what happened to a driver. I think that's really frustrating and really ridiculous, and something that I've had a major problem with Fox over the years. Hopefully that's something they do clean up long-term down the road, but that is something that's got to absolutely fix here going forward, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Mansfield Speedway. Now, it was reported by multiple people that it looks like Mansfield Speedway looks like it is going to be gone and will not be hosting races anytime soon. This is definitely unfortunate. Mansfield Speedway has hosted races over the last couple years. They hosted races from 2004 to 2008, I believe, in the NASCAR Camping World Truck Series. And they had, of course, their last Truck Series race that happened there was that really all-time classic race where Donnie Leah was able to hold off David Starr and Todd Bodine for the victory and pick up TGR's team a very awesome victory and pick up Kevin Buckler his first ever victory in the Camping World Truck Series. Mansfield Speedway, like I said, is a track that was around, also hosted dirt races, and I think also hosted World of Outlaws races as well, and also think hosted ARCA East races back in the day as well. So it's really unfortunate that another track is going away. We talked about Chicagoland Speedway. That track might be on the chopping block as well, which is really, really unfortunate as well. So it's a really sad day for the sport for sure when you see a track go away, because again, you don't want to see these tracks going away. You want to see tracks continue to race long term. Very sad day overall for sure for Mansfield Speedway that it looks like that track is no longer going to be having any sort of racing anytime soon, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Joey Logano. As was announced on Friday evening that Joey Logano is going to be racing in the Truck Series race at Bristol Dirt and making his first start in the Truck Series, I believe, since he won the Truck Series race at Mansfield Speedway in 2015. It's really unclear what team he'll be driving for, but from indications reports have been saying he most likely is going to be driving a 17 truck for DJM Racing. Like I said, this will be Joey Logano's first start in the Truck Series in nearly 7 years. But like I said, I think it's very important for Joey Logano to get that experience. And that's one thing that I'm expecting from a lot of drivers going forward is I think you're going to see a lot of drivers that are going to be entering the Truck Series race at Bristol Dirt. Last year, we saw quite a few drivers enter. Kyle Larson entered the Truck Series race at Bristol Dirt. Bubba Wallace entered it. And I believe also Daniel Suarez entered that Truck Series race as well. And I think you're going to see a lot of drivers continue to also. Martin Truex Jr. also entered that race as well. And I think that's something, and I think Kevin Harvick also entered that race too, if I'm not mistaken, last year. So you had a lot of guys that did enter that event. And like I said, I think you're going to see a lot more drivers get into that overall event as well going forward. So it's cool to see Joey Logano's entering. We don't know entirely what car he's running, but from what we've had indications, it does look like he's going to be driving a 17 for DJM Racing next year. So good to see that for sure, and I'm glad to see that we are going to see Joey Logano entering the Truck Series race. I think it's good to see new blood coming into those races, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Chase Elliott. Now, we've talked about the Hendrick 24-hour Le Mans entry. Jennifer asked the Circuit Americas about if Chase Elliott is going to enter the 24 hours Le Mans next year. And he really says that the only way that he is going to run a 24 hours Le Mans is if it's in an off week for NASCAR. He was also asked if he would miss the All-Star race for that, and he said, no, I want to go for $1 million. I want to say something about this. If I had to choose between the All-Star race and a Le Mans 24 hours, I would honestly go with running Le Mans 24 hours, especially since it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. A NASCAR car has not raced in a 24 hours Le Mans since 1976, and it's going to be Hendrick run entry, and Chase Elliott is a really good road course racer, so you would think that if they're going to choose somebody to put in their car, I think Chase Elliott would be a really good candidate to put into that car. And honestly, I really think that Chase Elliott has also won the All-Star race. He won the All-Star race in 2020, so why would you not give up the All-Star race to run that event? And they honestly could get somebody else to run that event for Chase Elliott, and NASCAR could run it. Now, I do agree with Chase Elliott that there probably should be an off week, though, in for him so he can run that event. But still, I would honestly take missing the All-Star race so I can enter the 24 hours Le Mans. The 24 hours Le Mans is a prestigious event, and if I had the opportunity to race in that event, I absolutely would. A couple drivers also quote tweeted and responded. They said they'd be interested into that ride as well. 3 drivers in particular. One of them is 4-time Indianapolis 500 winner Julio Castroneves, who has raced, of course, in DPI classes in the World Endurance Championship races as well. Castroneves knows how to get it done. Also, Casey Mears, who actually has driven Hendrick Motorsports in the past and has some endurance experience while driving for Chip Ganassi Racing, contending for that. I think he won the World 24 Hours of Daytona, if I'm not mistaken, and nearly won that event. And then, of course, Miguel Paluda, who ran for Junior Motorsports, is running a couple races for them this year. He also responded to that as well. If I'm Chase Elliott, I'm taking the opportunity to run the 24 Hours Le Mans. I think it's more important to run the 24 Hours of Le Mans than run the All-Stars, especially since it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I do hope he does run the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and I hope he does change his mind, but he doesn't. It is what it is, and he'll get some other drivers to run that event. We're probably going to see Jimmy Johnson run from his team, even if Jimmy Johnson tries to run for other organizations. I think Jimmy Johnson's going to run for this team as well. I do hope that Chase Elliott runs. I think if he doesn't, I think it's going to be overall really, really unfortunate for the sport, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Christopher Bell. As Christopher says, he feels like he was forced below the yellow line at Atlanta Motor Speedway. And he says that next time my hands are staying straight, whatever happens, happens. If you watched the NASCAR Cup Series race at Atlanta Motor Speedway about a week or two ago, you saw in the last lap of the race, Christopher Bell tried to advance by Ross Chastain on the bottom below the double yellow line, or the double red and white line, which you're not allowed to do that, and he tried to advance his position. I think I went back and watched the replay, and from what I can tell, I don't think that Christopher Bell really was forced below the yellow line. He actually was attempting to make a pass, and if you attempt to make a pass, you cannot pass that car below that double red line. That's been a rule that's been in NASCAR for 20-plus years. Now, I will say, though, that I do agree that you're going to cause more wrecks, and I'm not a big fan of the double yellow line, or whatever the line is. I'm not a big fan of that rule. But if it's a rule, we've got to follow those rules, and we've got to enforce these rules really, really properly as well. So that's one thing that's been a major thing that's been affecting these races, is they've not been able to clarify these rules over the years. But if it is a rule, you do have to follow, and I think that Christopher Bell should have known a little bit better. That being said, though, I do think that the rule eventually needs to go away. I'm not a big fan of these rules at super speedways. So I think that since adding that rule, I think it's caused a lot more accidents that have not needed to happen. So overall, I do hope that rule eventually goes away. I think it would be more important for the rule to go away. We'll see what happens down the road, but I think personally, I think the rule generally needs to go away long term, to be honest with you. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to talk about the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix that happened on Sunday. Now, this Saudi Arabian Grand Prix was very, very controversial coming into the weekend. Of course, if you watch it, there was a very bad thing that happened we're not going to get into. And then, of course, Mick Schumacher got involved in a very, very serious accident in the race. Before the race happened, it did not enter the event. For the green flag drop in the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, Yuki Tsunoda also was not able to take the green flag due to having his engine let go during the warm-up. And now let's get into the race. The race, in my opinion, was absolutely amazing. Max Verstappen, of course, took the victory, and it really was a battle most of the day between Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen. But Sergio Perez actually led the early Porsche race after winning the pole, but got caught out due to that yellow and that safety car coming out for Nicholas Latifi, and unfortunately lost an opportunity to win. Then he tried to pass Carlos Sainz and gave the spot back and never recovered from finishing fourth in the race. And the battle really came down, like I said, at the end of the day between Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen for the victory. The thing that really saved Max Verstappen's race, in my opinion, was the fact that there was a caution out, and you can't pass during segment one of the race, and that really saved the race overall as a whole. I thought Charles Leclerc was going to go to victory for the second time. Max Verstappen, like I said, took the overall victory. I think that's what is really cool to see, though, is the fact that we've had such good racing in all respective series, whether that is NASCAR or IndyCar or Formula 1. Formula 1, this car is provided overall better racing. We saw an all-time classic race, in my opinion. I'm not a big fan of the track due to the controversies around it, but like I said, I really, really enjoyed the race this weekend. The racing was really, really fun. As a fan of Formula 1, I've been becoming more and more of a fan of Formula 1. And like I said, I've said this on Twitter already, but Formula 1's coverage, by the way, is better than NASCAR's coverage. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons Formula 1 is getting a lot more fans hooked out. And that's why I think ratings are probably going to be really, really good. Like I said, not a fan of the track, but the racing is really, really exciting and very, very fun for us. And again, good race to go wrong, in my opinion. We've got a race next week in Australia, which I'm looking forward to that. And I think that these two younger drivers, they have a lot of respect for each other. They basically, Charles literally congratulating Max Verstappen over the radio, and that's a really good thing of sportsmanship. And I think they're friends off the track as well. So, very exciting race for sure, and I'm glad to see that Max Verstappen won. Great race in Formula 1, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Ross Chastain and AJ Allmendinger. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Cup Series race, you saw what happened on the last lap of the race. On the final restart, Ross Chastain gets a really, really good jump on Tyler Reddick. As you're coming in, I believe, turn 11 and turn 12, AJ Allmendinger decides to start closing in, really starts closing in at the end of the race. And I believe in turn number 15 or 16, AJ gives the bumper to Ross Chastain and pushes him outside the track. Then Ross Chastain is side by side with Alex Bowman. And it looks like that AJ is going to win the race. Well, Ross Chastain gets behind AJ Allmendinger and pushes him into Alex Bowman, dumping him and getting into the back of him and basically spinning him out near the end of the race. And Ross Chastain scoots through and takes the victory in the race. Alex Bowman was not mad at Ross Chastain. You know, some people thought that Alex was going to be mad at Ross Chastain. But Alex Bowman was very, very happy with Ross Chastain and came to congratulate him on his first victory. And they're good friends off the track as well. And Alex Bowman said after the race, he says, "Put it on a t-shirt and sell the hell out of it." That's exactly what he said. Alex Bowman with this quote, he's got a really, really good personality. Now, after the race, AJ Allmendinger was not very happy after the race, and he basically expected it, but was not very, very happy after what happened in the race as well. Was not one of the happiest drivers and one of the happiest campers after the race. And Ross Chastain basically stood by it, basically saying that I basically would have done the same thing, and basically said AJ would have probably done the same thing. Here's my 2 cents on the incident. I think it's fair game. Ross Chastain got bumped by AJ and basically got pushed off the racetrack and basically threw off the track. So Ross and AJ should have expected that the dump was coming back to him. And he absolutely knew it was coming. Now, it doesn't mean that what he did wasn't the cleanest move, but I think especially after getting bumped and moved out of the track and bump and run there, it's fair game for Ross Chastain to do what he did there. He got bumped first, so he paid it back there on that same lap and was able to win the race. And I think that's what you got to do. You got to have sometimes drivers that are able to make those really, really aggressive moves. Now, again, it's not saying that it was innocent, but still, you got to do what you got to do to win these races. And in my opinion, I think it really was a really, really good race, too, for the fans that watched the overall event. And I think, in my opinion, when it comes to the contact with AJ and Ross, I think, honestly, Ross deserves a win. Best car all day, too. Was up front, led the most laps in the event, and Ross's win was coming, so Ross Chastain deserved the win. Track that's got their first win, and in my opinion, Ross Chastain absolutely deserved the victory, in my honest and sincere opinion, to be honest with you. Now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Chad Knaus. It was announced on Sunday during Stage 3 of the race that Chad Knaus is going to be joining the Fox Sports booth for 2 races this year. He'll be at Richmond and Marsville the next couple weeks. He'll be joining an all-star selection and will be in the booth with Clint Boyer and Mike Joy for the next couple weeks. This has got me really, really excited. If you've watched races in the past where Chad Knaus has been a commentator, he has also not only been really, really intriguing, but very, very exciting to listen to. Of course, 7-time NASCAR Cup Series Championship caliber crew chief, and of course, one of the guys who's running the Hendrick operations currently at the moment, and a big factor in Hendrick's success last year where they were able to win the championship with Kyle Larson. Chad Knaus, arguably one of the most best crew chiefs in NASCAR history, and I think that he will continue to be very successful as one of the higher-ups at Hendrick Motorsports. But I think he does bring a lot of excitement to the Fox Sports booth. I think he's going to do a really good job in the booth this time around, and having him in there is great. I definitely like to see Larry McReynolds get in the booth at some point, but you think about the All-Star selection of cast of people that they've had in the Fox Sports booth. Of course, Tony Stewart the last couple weeks and basically been in the booth this year so far. Matt Kenseth at Auto Club, Danica Patrick for a couple weeks, and then Jeff Gordon. But now having Chad Knaus in the Fox Sports booth for 2 weeks. Now, like I said, he does have quite a bit of experience. He's been in multiple times in the NASCAR Xfinity Series booth, and he had a lot of chemistry with Denny Hamlin in that Daytona race earlier this year. And I think that he will once again be able to bring that chemistry as well. And I think that him and Clint Boyer and Mike Joy are going to bring really good chemistry. And I think that they're going to do really, really good this time around. I think we're actually going to see a really good booth. Now, Fox's production in their pre-race is a much different story, but I think one thing that Fox has really gotten right this year is I think besides Danica, really, I think they've gotten a really good selection of cast this year of people to be in there as the all-star group. Now, I'm definitely also intrigued to see what other people are going to be in the booth. Are they bring Tony Stewart back for Bristol Dirt? I think Tony Stewart coming back to Bristol Dirt would be really, really important. Or getting a dirt ringer in there to commentate, like a Kevin Swindell, perhaps, maybe, to get into there would be really, really awesome because they've had Kevin Swindell in the past. Maybe long-term they get people, Larry McReynolds in there. I want to see Larry McReynolds get in at some point, but if you're getting another crew chief in there that deserves to be there, I think Chad Knaus absolutely should be in the Fox Sports booth. And like I said, I think having Chad in the Fox Sports booth is really, really awesome. So, really cool to see this for sure. And like I said, I think Chad Knaus will be also really, really exciting. But we'll also tell it like it is, and we'll do a really, really good job. So, very, very exciting news for sure that Chad Knaus is going to be in the Fox Sports booth. And I'm very excited to see that he will be in there for a couple races the next 2 weeks. And then at Bristol Dirt the next time, we'll have a new person in the booth or we'll have someone like Tony Stewart get in there as well. So really exciting news for sure, and I'm glad to see that Chad Knaus is returning to the Fox Sports Booth and coming back to the Fox Sports Booth to commentate here. And now we're going to jump on to the first of two major stories of today's episode as we are talking about RFK Racing. As they announced on Friday that they are going to appeal the penalties that they received this past Thursday or Tuesday. Now, if you watch my channel, and you probably, unless you're living under a rug, you probably know at this point that RFK Racing earlier this week was assessed major penalties. 100-point penalties, 100 driver points penalties, 100 owner point penalties, $100,000, a 4-race suspension for Matt McCall, and of course 10 playoff points that they lost and dropped them at the time from 16th to 35th in points. Now, Matt McCall, I believe, has already served one of his races, and Josh Sell was the crew chief, and Brad Keselowski did get a top 15 finish this past weekend. But the reason that they received a massive penalty is a mess with a single source vendor part. It was one of, I think, near the rear of the body, basically. I think they took the inserts of the foam outside of the rear of the body, and you cannot do that. Any of their, I think there are 45 or 46 single source vendor parts from the next gen car that you are not supposed to touch. If you mess with those parts, you're going to be getting massive penalties. And I don't blame Brad Keselowski and RFK Racing for trying to appeal this penalty. Now, it's probably going to be a few weeks before we officially find out what exactly happens. But like I said, even if they do appeal this, they're probably not going to get this penalty rescinded, unfortunately. And there's a big reason for that is because of the fact that RFK Racing, again, I actually respect them for trying to appeal this penalty because they don't want their season to really be over. But at the same time, you're, like I said, not supposed to be able to touch these cars and mess with the single source vendor parts, because if you mess with those parts, you're going to be getting some massive fines. And let's be honest with ourselves here. They could have gotten L4. They could have gotten L4s, which could have resulted in being eliminated from the playoffs completely. But NASCAR was a little bit lenient with them, and NASCAR said that they were going to be really strict. And unfortunately, they're the team that really bit the bullet. And let's not forget that earlier this year at Daytona, they were basically on the verge of getting a massive penalty there, and they could have gotten a much bigger penalty there than they've gotten here. They could have gotten penalized there, but they got lucky, and so NASCAR was putting him under scrutiny. And a lot of people act like, well, they brought him back to R&D Center. Of course they discovered it. Well, a lot of people also don't remember this, but they don't really give penalties out at the R&D Center. This is a rare case where they found it at the R&D Center, and if they didn't take this car back R&D Center, they would have been able to get away with this and wouldn't have been able to happen. But at the same time, NASCAR is really strict. Now, multiple drivers did say at COTA this weekend that they probably like really know what happened, which I do entirely agree. I saw multiple people talk about this throughout this week as well on YouTube. I think NASCAR should be able to at least announce where they got the penalty so that they basically were exactly they got penalized for, so that the teams don't try to do that and also end up with major penalties, so that it's like, okay, we can't do this. So I think that NASCAR should at least set something in regards to that. But at the same time, teams know that they will dictate, because of course teams are going to try to skirt the edge of Atlanta Motor Speedway being an aero-sensitive track. You, of course, are going to have basically people trying to skirt those lines. That being said, though, I do believe that they should not have been able to mess with those parts. If you mess with those parts, like I said, you're going to be getting some massive penalties right there. So I understand RFK trying to appeal the penalties. I think it makes a lot of sense for them to try to appeal those penalties. Again, if they don't try to appeal it, they're probably not going to get it. But I don't, and again, for people saying they're probably going to get more points, basically lost this, they're not going to get any extra penalties added on them for trying to appeal it. I understand it. Again, I expected them to appeal this penalty because it's a massive penalty. That's basically their season pretty much over. And even with their 14th place finish, they're still 104, 105 points back of the playoffs right now. And the only way that they're going to get in right now is by a win. Now, 30th place getting up to there is going to be really easy because, again, they don't have to get as many points to get their 30th as it is 16th. But they essentially are going to need a win at a super speedway. So that's why they are appealing the penalty. I don't think they're going to win it, but still, I think it's important for them to try to appeal this penalty. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Circuit of the Americas. And it is expected that Circuit Americas is going to return to the NASCAR schedule in 2023. Circuit Americas has hosted racing for the last 2 years. In 2021, Chase Elliott won. And this past weekend, we saw an absolute excellent race. Now, it was added in addition that basically reported that COTA is going to be building a massive amusement park on its grounds with 30 rides and 2 big roller coasters that could open as soon as 2023. Circuit Americas is becoming one of the most relevant tracks in the motorsports world. You look how popular the F1 race is. The F1 race is already sold out for this year, and last year, all throughout the weekend, I believe they got over 400,000 people that showed up throughout the weekend, which I believe the most attended race for Formula 1, or most attended weekend Formula 1 in the history of the event. And I think a lot of that, of course, helped with the drive to survive. But Circuit Americas is definitely a track that is really, really growing. And I'm really excited to see that COTA is coming back to the schedule next year. I think it absolutely deserves it, considering I know that the Truck Xfinity Series races weren't the greatest, but that Cup Series race was absolutely a barn burner race and had that all-time classic finish. And we're going to be talking about this race for a very, very long time. But another reason I'm really, really excited that COTA is coming back is it shows that NASCAR is succeeding in major markets. It was reported earlier this week by Adam Stern on Friday that they were expecting a very similar sized crowd. They were expecting about 55,000 people to show up to the track, and that just shows that really people came back despite how bad the race was. Well, not how bad the race was, but how bad the weather was at the track last year. People still were welcome to coming back. And another thing is NASCAR continues to go into new markets, well, it keeps in new markets. And I love that NASCAR is trying to change the boundaries and go into more trendy areas. Look at Nashville Super Speedway. They went back to Nashville Super Speedway for the first time since 2011 and the first time for the Cup Series cars, trying to get to Nashville, which is arguably the fastest growing city in the United States, and also trying to get into the Austin area, which is also one of the fastest growing cities in the United States. And of course, coming to St. Louis, which, while it isn't growing as much, you've got a massive market over there and jumping out to new markets. While this leadership have not agreed with everything that they've done, I think coming back to a track like COTA is really, really awesome. And honestly, I'd rather come to COTA than go to Texas Motor Speedway. Yes, I know the next gen car has not raced at Texas Motor Speedway yet, but still, I think returning to Circuit Americas is really, really important for the long-term future of the sport, and it is one of the tracks that's becoming the most iconic. You think about Daytona, you think about Indianapolis. COTA is getting up there as a track that a lot of people thought was going to be one of the big premier tracks, and I know racing hasn't been great over the years for Formula 1 in the past and stuff, but still, I think it is super important for a track like COTA to continue to be on the NASCAR schedule long term, considering the road course racing. Now, the road course procedures are one thing that definitely needs to get addressed, especially in those S's where they remove the turtles. They probably need to figure out how to penalize people there. It's one thing that was really, really missed in the race that hopefully will get addressed long term. But in those S's, because that's the only area where they were penalizing people, because other areas you could get off the track, but in that area, for whatever reason, can't get off the track, which I really don't entirely understand. I think Formula has those rules too. But still, the racing was absolutely phenomenal and amazing, and the energy around the event was really, really great. People were there saying that the event was really, really awesome, and this race was really, really great too. So, and then, again, we expect the next car to be really good with the road course racing, and it put on a really, really good show. And for them to come back to COTA next year, I think is really, really awesome to see. And like I said, I'm excited as a racing fan, and we've had such good racing this year overall as a whole. The fact that we're going to be coming back to COTA next year is great. Now, the 2023 schedule is not expected to be released here for a couple months, but it is going to be released earlier this year than it was last year. I believe the 2023 schedule was released in late September last year, if I'm not mistaken, early October, so it was released really, really late. I do think the schedule is going to come out earlier this year, probably around June and July this year, and they're saying there's not going to be as many changes, but I do think we'll see at least a few changes. But COTA coming back to the schedule, I think is really, really awesome and great for the sport, to be honest with you. So anyway, that is it today's on NASCAR and Motorsports video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notification so you're notified when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on page as well. Let's schedule over that and comment your thoughts on today's video. What are your thoughts about Circuit Americas returning to NASCAR in 2023? Let me know in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about RFK appealing the penalties? Do you think that they're doing the right thing here, or do you think they should not have appealed the penalties? Let me know in the comments below. Tomorrow on my channel, we're going to have picks on the channel for tomorrow, and then later this week, I might be releasing that silly season project, but no guarantees. But I do have also a lot of other products that are going to be coming out very, very soon on the channel that you guys are going to be seeing. So anyway, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's video, and I'll see you guys next time for some more great, awesome NASCAR and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.